He thought inviting his poor ex-wife to his wedding would humiliate her. But when she arrived in a limousine with 3 surprising children, the tables turned in a way he never imagined. Daniel was the kind of man who never liked looking back at his mistakes. He believed that the past was something to bury and forget, especially if it made him look weak. When he first married Clara, he thought he had made a good choice. Quiet, caring, and always believed in him, even when he had nothing. But as years went by, Daniel grew tired of their modest life. He blamed Clara for every failure, for every dream he could not reach. To him, she was the reason he was still struggling. Instead of seeing her sacrifices, he only saw the things they could not afford, the opportunities that slipped through his hands. And the friends, who were already richer and happier. Their small apartment was filled with arguments that grew louder each day. Clara tried to keep the peace, cooking his favorite meals, waiting for him late into the night, encouraging him when business plans failed. But Daniel's pride was louder than her patience. He thought she was holding him back, dragging him down into a life he did not want. The more she loved him, the more he resented her. Eventually he left. The divorce was quick and cold. Clara did not fight for much, not even for money, because she had no strength left to argue. She let him walk away with his pride, his bitterness, and his expensive dreams. After all, she thought, maybe freedom was the only gift she could give him. Daniel left her behind and stepped into a new world, one where he was free to chase money and status without anyone reminding him of how hard life could be. Months after the divorce, Daniel found someone new. Her name was Melissa. She was beautiful, charming, and most importantly to him, she came from a wealthy family. Her father owned businesses, her mother was respected in society, and her circle of friends lived the kind of life Daniel had always wanted. When he stood beside Melissa, he felt powerful, admired, and finally important. She introduced him to people who shook his hand with respect, not pity. He wore better clothes, drove better cars, and tasted the luxury that had always been out of reach when he was with Clara. Melissa's parents were not sure about him at first. They thought he was a little too ambitious, maybe too eager to climb higher than his own position. But Melissa was in love, or at least she believed she was, and Daniel was smart enough to charm them. Soon he became not just her boyfriend, but her fiancé. The wedding was planned to be the event of the year. A grand hall, expensive decorations, hundreds of guests. Daniel could hardly believe this was his life now. Standing beside Melissa, he felt as though he had finally won. But there was still one thing that lingered in his heart, a bitter taste that he could not ignore. That was Clara. He remembered her in their small kitchen, wearing cheap dresses. Worrying about the bills, he remembered her begging him to give their marriage another chance. To him, she was a symbol of failure, and he wanted the world to see the difference between the poor woman he had left behind and the glamorous new life he had chosen. One evening, while going through the guest list with Melissa, an idea came to his mind. He smirked to himself as he added another name, Clara. He would invite her. Not because he cared, not because he wanted to be kind, but because he wanted her to walk into that grand hall. Look at the luxury around her and feel small. He wanted her to see him in his suit, beside his wealthy bride, while she sat alone in a corner dressed in something simple, reminding everyone that she was nothing more than his poor ex-wife. The thought gave him satisfaction. He could already imagine the whispers of the guests. Look, that's his ex-wife. She looks so ordinary. No wonder he moved on. In Daniel's mind, it would be the final proof that he had risen above his past, that leaving Clara was the best decision of his life, so the invitation was sent. Clara received it on a quiet morning. She opened the envelope slowly, reading the elegant words written in gold. For a long moment, she sat in silence, staring at the card. She knew exactly why Daniel had sent it. It was not kindness, not respect. It was a challenge. He wanted her to come so that he could laugh in his heart, so that others could compare her to Melissa and see who had truly won. Clara could have thrown it away. She could have ignored it, stayed home and spared herself the pain. But something inside her told her to go, not to fight, not to argue, not even to prove a point. She simply wanted to walk in with her head held high, to show him that she was not broken, that his decision to leave her had not destroyed her. She smiled faintly, folded the invitation, and placed it back in the envelope. She did not tell anyone about it, not even the closest friends who supported her. She kept it as her quiet secret, her silent decision. She would go, but she would not go as the weak woman he expected to see. Days turned into weeks as the wedding day approached. Daniel grew more excited, bragging to friends about how his ex-wife would be there, hinting that they would see the difference between his past and present. Melissa laughed at his jokes, though a small part of her wondered why he cared so much. But Daniel brushed off her doubts, telling her it was only for fun, only to close the chapter of his old life. Meanwhile, Clara prepared in her own quiet way. She did not rush or panic. Her life had already changed since the divorce, though. Daniel did not know it. She had faced hardships, yes, but she had also found strength she never knew she had. She had learned to stand on her own feet, to make choices without fear, and to build a life with dignity. She had no interest in revenge, but she was not going to give Daniel the satisfaction of seeing her defeated. On the night before the wedding, Daniel celebrated with his friends, laughing loudly, drinking to his future. He imagined Clara arriving in a worn-out dress, sitting awkwardly, and leaving early with shame on her face. That picture entertained him, thought he had outsmarted her, that he was in complete control of how the story would end. But Clara, in her quiet home, looked at her reflection in the mirror. She thought of the years she had spent with him, of the tears and the broken promises, and then she thought of the woman she had become since he left. She straightened her shoulders, whispered to herself that she was ready, and went to sleep peacefully. The day was coming, and while Daniel believed he was preparing to humiliate her, he had no idea that fate was preparing something very different. The wedding day arrived with sunshine spilling across the streets, making the world look bright and golden. The grand hall was decorated with white roses and shining lights that sparkled like stars. Expensive cars lined up outside, guests stepped out wearing glittering clothes, and the sound of music filled the air. Everyone who walked in could see that this was not just a wedding, it was a display of wealth, power, and status. Daniel moved among the guests with a wide smile, greeting them as if he were already a man of great importance. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit that hugged his shoulders, and a watch that gleamed under the lights. Every handshake, every compliment made his chest swell with pride. People whispered about how lucky he was to marry Melissa, about how far he had come. In life, Daniel drank in every word like sweet wine, but deep inside, beneath his confident smile, there was a restless excitement. He kept glancing toward the entrance of the hall. He was waiting. Not for Melissa. Shea was already busy with her family, surrounded by her bridesmaids, glowing in her expensive gown. But for Clara, he wanted to see her walk in, alone, dressed in something simple and plain. He wanted his friends to notice her, to whisper and compare. He imagined the moment again and again, her walking awkwardly through the doors, her head lowered, her presence small against the grandness of the place. Melissa's family moved around, talking to guests, their laughter filling the air. Her father spoke proudly about the businesses he owned, and her mother looked pleased with the elegant crowd. They liked to show their influence, just like Daniel did. Melissa herself was smiling happily, but sometimes her eyes caught Daniel staring at the door too often. She didn't understand why he seemed so eager about something other than their wedding. "Why do you keep looking at the entrance?" she asked him softly when no one was listening. "Oh, nothing," Daniel replied with a smirk. "Just waiting for a special guest." Melissa raised an eyebrow, but didn't push him further. She thought maybe he was waiting for an important business friend, or someone from his side of the family. She had no idea what he really meant. Meanwhile, the hall filled quickly. Waiters moved between tables, carrying drinks and trays of food. The smell of roasted meat, fresh bread, and sweet desserts floated in the air. Laughter and chatter grew louder as more people arrived. Everyone was in a cheerful mood, excited for the ceremony to begin. Then, just when Daniel was about to give up, glancing at the door every few seconds, the sound of a car outside caught the attention of several guests near the entrance. A sleek black limousine stopped in front of the hall. Its glossy surface reflected the lights, and the way it rolled up so smoothly made people turn their heads in curiosity. Daniel's smile froze. His eyes locked on the car as the driver stepped out in a sharp uniform and walked around to open the back door. The guests near the entrance leaned forward, whispering, "Who could it be? Some important official? A celebrity?" And then Clara stepped out. She was dressed in an elegant gown, simple yet shining with quiet grace. Her hair was styled beautifully, her steps confident, her posture straight. She did not look nervous or embarrassed. She did not look like the poor ex-wife Daniel had mocked for months. Instead, she looked like someone who belonged right there in the middle of wealth and elegance. As if she had walked out of another world entirely. The whispers started instantly. "Who is that? She looks stunning. She came in a limousine." Daniel felt his throat tighten. This was not the scene he had imagined. He had pictured Clara walking timidly, her clothes cheap and outdated. He had wanted his guests to look at her with pity or judgment, but instead they looked at her with admiration and curiosity. She wasn't small. She wasn't defeated. She was glowing. Melissa noticed the change in his face. "Do you know her?" she asked, a hint of suspicion in her voice. Daniel forced a smile. "Just someone I used to know." Clara walked slowly, each step echoing with confidence. "People!" stepped aside to make room, their eyes following her. She greeted a few guests politely, her voice calm, her smile gentle. She looked neither proud nor bitter, just composed, like someone who had nothing to prove and nothing to fear. Daniel's friends nudged each other, whispering. Some had heard him make jokes about his ex-wife, about how poor and pitiful she was. Now they looked from Daniel to Clara, and their expressions changed. The story they had believed didn't match the woman standing in front of them. Melissa's family noticed too. Her mother whispered to her father, and he narrowed his eyes at Daniel. Who was this woman who arrived in a limousine, dressed so elegantly? Walking like she owned the ground beneath her feet? Daniel's pride began to crack. He tried to keep smiling, tried to laugh with his guests, but his mind was racing. This was not how it was supposed to go. She was supposed to look weak, not powerful. He could feel the attention slipping away from him, drifting toward her, and he hated it. Clara, however, did not look at him immediately. She walked to her seat calmly, as if the wedding was nothing more than another event in her day. Made people whisper more? A group of women near the corner leaned together, saying, "She looks more like the bride than the bride herself." Melissa heard some of the whispers too, and her heart sank a little. She did not know who Clara was, but she could feel the tension in Daniel's stiff smile, in the way he avoided looking at her directly. Something was not right. Daniel finally forced himself to approach Clara. He leaned down slightly, keeping his voice low so others wouldn't hear. "Why did you come?" he asked, his tone sharp, though his lips tried to hold a fake smile. Clara looked at him calmly. "You invited me," she said simply. Those 3 words hit him like a stone. He had, indeed, invited her. He had wanted this. But now, seeing her there, he wished he hadn't. "You're trying to embarrass me," he hissed softly. Clara tilted her head slightly. "No, Daniel, I don't need to try." Her calmness unsettled him more than anger ever could. If she had shouted, he could have dismissed her as bitter. But her quiet strength made him feel small, as if all his wealth and power meant nothing in front of her dignity. Guests continued whispering, casting curious glances at her. Some men admired her confidence. Some women envied her elegance. The longer she stayed, the more Daniel felt the ground slipping from under his feet. And then, just when he thought he had seen enough, the limousine driver returned. He walked back to the car and opened the door again. Daniel froze, his stomach twisting with unease. Out stepped 3 small children, dressed neatly, their little shoes tapping against the marble floor as they held each other's hands. The hall grew quiet. Everyone stared as the children walked toward Clara. She bent down, her face softening into the warmest smile, and opened her arms. The children ran into her embrace, laughing, their voices bright. Daniel's world tilted. He could not breathe. 3 children. Triplets. His mind screamed with questions. Whose children were they? Why were they with her? Why had he never known? Clara stood again, holding the children's hands, calm as ever. The guests whispered louder, now their curiosity burning. Daniel's heart pounded. This was no longer just about her arrival in a limousine. This was something bigger, something he had never expected. The day he thought would crown his victory was starting to feel like the beginning of his downfall. The hall was still buzzing from Clara's surprising arrival when the limousine driver carefully guided the 3 children toward her. They were about 5 years old, dressed in matching clothes that made them look even more noticeable. 2 boys and a girl, their little hands clinging to each other, their eyes wide as they stepped into the grand hall. The guests fell into an almost complete silence. Everyone had been expecting only the bride and groom to steal the attention that day. But now all eyes were fixed on Clara and the 3 children who had just appeared like a mystery dropped from the sky. Clara bent down gracefully, her long gown flowing around her, and opened her arms wide. The children's faces lit up, and they ran toward her, their small shoes clicking against the marble floor. She hugged them tightly, kissed their foreheads, and held their hands as she stood again. Her smile was soft, but her confidence shone, even brighter now. It was as if she had walked into the wedding not just as one person, but with 3 shining stars beside her. Whispers started, spreading faster than wildfire. Guests leaned close to each other, whispering questions in hushed voices. Whose children are they? Are they hers? Why didn't anyone know about this? A few guests even dared to look directly at Daniel, their eyes narrowing with suspicion. Daniel's chest tightened. His smile, which had been forced already, now slipped away completely. I had not expected this. It's not in his wildest dreams had. He imagined that Clara would arrive in a limousine, and even worse, with 3 children who seemed connected to her so deeply. His mind raced with questions he didn't want to answer. Were they hers? And if they were, whose were they? The timeline of their ages burned in his brain. He began to realize a terrifying possibility. Melissa, standing a few feet away, had also noticed. Her lips parted slightly as she stared at the children, then at Clara, then finally at Daniel. Something inside her began to twist uncomfortably. She sensed the tension in her fiancé's stiff body, the way his jaw tightened, the way his hands twitched nervously. He wasn't calm, he wasn't casual, he was shaken. Clara, on the other hand, didn't seem nervous at all. She led the children to an empty table near the middle of the hall. People stepped aside respectfully, some of them even smiling at the triplets. They were adorable, and their innocent laughter filled the air, softening the atmosphere even while it made Daniel's heart pound harder. The little girl tugged gently at Clara's dress and whispered something to her, making Clara lean down and laugh softly. To everyone watching, they looked like a picture of pure happiness, as though they had walked into the hall with their own glow that outshined the expensive lights above. Daniel's best friend leaned closer to him and whispered, "I thought you said your ex-wife was poor and struggling. She doesn't look like that at all. And those kids. What's going on?" Daniel felt sweat prick at the back of his neck. He forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. They're probably not hers. Maybe she's babysitting. But even as he said the words, his voice cracked slightly. His friend raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. Melissa's mother, a sharp-eyed woman who missed nothing, whispered something to her husband, while her gaze stayed locked on Clara. Her husband frowned deeply and turned his suspicious eyes to Daniel. They had been cautious about him from the beginning, and this new twist made their doubts rise again. Who was this woman that walked with such pride? Who were those children? And why did their soon-to-be son-in-law look so pale? Meanwhile, Clara behaved as though nothing unusual was happening. She fixed the children's hair gently, gave them each a glass of juice from the waiter's tray, and sat with them calmly. She didn't need to speak loudly or make a scene. Her presence alone had shifted the entire energy of the wedding. What was supposed to be Daniel's perfect day, his day to shine, was slowly becoming Clara's silent stage. Melissa finally walked over to Daniel, her face tight with suspicion. "Who is she?" she asked in a low voice, though the sharpness in her tone could cut glass. Daniel licked his lips nervously. "She's my ex-wife." Melissa blinked. The words hit her like ice. He had mentioned an ex-wife before, but only in passing, and always with mocking jokes. He had painted a picture of a poor woman, someone small and insignificant. But the woman sitting calmly with 3 well-dressed children was not that picture at all. She looked dignified, respected, even powerful. "Why didn't you tell me she would be here?" Melissa pressed, her voice trembling slightly. Daniel forced another shaky smile because it didn't matter. "She doesn't matter." Melissa's eyes flicked to Clara again, and she whispered sharply, "Then why does everyone seem to be looking at her instead of us?" Daniel had no answer. His tongue felt heavy in his mouth. He had invited Clara to disgrace her, but now she was the one holding all the attention, and not in shame, but in admiration. The children, unaware of the heavy atmosphere, laughed and played with the small napkins on the table, folding them into funny shapes. One of the boys pointed toward the stage where Daniel and Melissa were supposed to stand. Clara gently shook her head, pulling him closer. It was such a natural moment, so full of love, that several guests smiled warmly at the sight. Finally, one bold guest walked up to Clara. He was an older man, a family friend of Melissa's parents, and he spoke loud enough for many people to hear. "My dear, you look lovely tonight. And these children, they're beautiful. May I ask, are they yours?" The question made Daniel's heart slam in his chest. He wanted to scream at the man to sit down, to stay quiet, but the words stuck in his throat. Melissa's parents leaned forward eagerly, waiting for the answer. The room grew quiet again, the music still playing softly in the background, but the attention focused entirely on Clara. Clara smiled politely, her eyes gentle, but steady. She looked at the man and nodded. "Yes, they are mine." Gasps echoed softly around the hall. Guests looked at each other with wide eyes. The whispers started again, louder now. If they were hers, then whose children were they? Some of the women glanced at Daniel, their eyes narrowing as the pieces started to fit together in their minds. Daniel's knees felt weak. His mouth went dry. He could not stop staring at the children, the shape of their faces, their eyes, their hair. Were so familiar, too familiar. He could see traces of himself in them, though he didn't want to believe it. He clenched his fists, trying to hold on to control. But inside his world was crumbling. Clara didn't reveal the whole truth yet. She let the suspense hang in the air, let the whispers swirl. She didn't rush to explain. She simply sipped her drink calmly and stroked the little girl's hair as if nothing were unusual. Her quiet confidence spoke louder than any speech. She knew exactly what she was doing, though she carried it with grace. Daniel wanted to walk over, to demand answers. But he couldn't risk making a scene in front of Melissa's family. He stood frozen, smiling weakly at the guests who kept glancing at him with curiosity and suspicion. Melissa, however, was no longer smiling. Her eyes had turned cold as she watched Clara with the triplets. Something inside her told her this wasn't just coincidence. And the way Daniel looked so shaken only confirmed her fear. The hall, once filled with joy and celebration, now pulsed. With tension, guests tried to act normal, eating, drinking, and chatting. But every few seconds, their eyes drifted back to Clara and the children. The bride and groom were supposed to be the center of attention, but it was Clara's mysterious entrance and the shocking appearance of the triplets that stole every glance, every whisper, every thought. For Daniel, the nightmare had just begun. The children's laughter felt like echoes pounding against his chest. He knew deep inside that his carefully built image was about to collapse, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The air inside the hall felt heavier with every passing second. Music played softly, glasses clinked, but the whispers were louder than everything else. Guests no longer talked about the wedding cake, the decorations, or Melissa's dress. Only talked about Clara and the 3 children who sat beside her, looking too comfortable, too connected to be ignored. Daniel stood near the stage, his body stiff, his jaw tight. He pretended to laugh with a group of his friends, but his laughter sounded hollow and his eyes kept darting toward Clara. The questions in his mind wouldn't stop spinning. Were they hers? Were they his? If they were his, then why hadn't he known? Why hadn't she told him? The thought made him sweat beneath his expensive suit. He wiped his forehead, but it didn't help. Melissa noticed everything. She saw his nervous glances, the way he avoided looking directly at Clara, the way his hands clenched and unclenched. Her chest burned with suspicion. She had never seen her fiancé so restless, so uncomfortable. Part of her already knew the truth, even before it was spoken out loud, but she wanted to hear it clearly. She wanted the lies stripped away. The children sat quietly now, sipping juice, their big eyes observing the grand hall. Every now and then they looked up at Clara, smiling brightly, and she touched their cheeks lovingly. To anyone watching, there was no doubt they were hers, but whose blood ran in their veins? That was the question on everyone's mind. Finally, another guest, braver than the rest, asked the question aloud. A middle-aged woman, one of Melissa's distant relatives, stood near Clara's table and said, "They are beautiful, dear. But where is their father? Is he not with you?" The hall fell completely silent. Forks froze in midair. Glasses stopped halfway to lips. Everyone waited. Daniel felt his heart stop beating. Melissa's mother's eyes narrowed like sharp knives, and Melissa herself turned to stare at Clara with burning curiosity. Clara looked up calmly, her expression neither angry nor nervous. She smiled faintly and said, "Their father?" She paused, her eyes drifting toward Daniel for just a second, enough for people to notice. "Their father is a man who chose not to stay. He walked away before he even knew they were coming into this world." A loud gasp rippled through the hall. People turned their heads sharply toward Daniel. He stood frozen, his eyes wide, his lips trembling as though words were trapped inside but couldn't escape. The woman blinked, confused. "Are you saying?" she began, but Clara nodded before she could finish. "Yes, these are Daniel's children, my children, our children." The words hit the room like thunder. Guests covered their mouths with shock, some whispering louder now, some staring openly at Daniel. The triplets, innocent and unaware of the storm around them, looked at Clara with bright eyes, as if proud that she had spoken the truth. Melissa's face drained of color. Her hands trembled as she clutched the edge of her gown. She turned sharply toward Daniel. "Is it true?" she demanded, her voice shaking but loud enough for many to hear. Daniel's lips moved, but no sound came out. He wanted to deny it, to laugh it off, but the children's faces betrayed him, their eyes, their smiles, even the way one of the boys rubbed his forehead in the same habit Daniel had it was undeniable. People didn't need DNA tests to see the truth. The resemblance was there, clear as daylight. Clara stroked the little girl's hair gently and continued speaking, her voice steady. "When you divorced me, Daniel, I didn't even know I was pregnant. You were too busy chasing your new life, too eager to run away from the struggles we had. By the time I realized you were already gone..." She paused, letting the silence fill the room. "I tried to reach you, but you never answered, and then I stopped trying, because I realized these children deserved better than a father who had no heart to care for them." Her words cut deep. People stared at Daniel with disappointment, some even with disgust. Melissa's parents looked furious. Melissa herself looked broken, like her world had just shattered. Daniel finally found his voice, but it came out cracked and desperate. You should have told me," he stammered, pointing a trembling finger at Clara. "You should have." Clara raised her head, her calmness silencing him instantly. "I did, Daniel. I sent letters. I left messages. But you were too busy showing off your new life to listen. You didn't want to hear from me. You erased me from your world, so I gave you what you wanted. I raised them without you." Looked at her lovingly, their little faces glowing with innocence. To them, Clara was their whole world, the only parent they had ever needed. Guests looked at her with admiration now, whispering words like strong, brave, amazing. Instead of the humiliation Daniel had planned for her, she had become the hero in their eyes. Melissa's mother stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Her eyes blazed with anger as she looked at Daniel. "You hid this?" Lead to us, she snapped, her voice sharp and cold. You told us nothing about these children, nothing about your past. Daniel tried to defend himself. I didn't know. She never, but Melissa's father cut him off, his voice booming across the hall. Enough. The resemblance is clear.
Ow.
The truth is clear.
Ow.
You left your own children and pretended they did not exist. And now you expect us to welcome you into our family? Melissa, tears streaming down her cheeks, turned to Daniel. Her lips trembled as she whispered, You told me she was nothing. You told me she was poor, pathetic. You never said she was raising your children alone. Her voice broke. How could you do this? Daniel reached for her hand desperately, but she pulled away as though his touch burned her. Guests watched every move, every word, like spectators at a theater. Only this was no play. This was the ugly truth laid bare. Clara, meanwhile, remained calm. She did not shout, she did not gloat. She simply held her children close and looked at Daniel one last time. I didn't come here to ruin your wedding, Daniel. You invited me, remember? I only came because I wanted you to see what you left behind. Not to beg, not to fight, but to show you that I didn't break. We didn't break. She kissed the little girl's head gently. We are stronger without you. The words stung like fire, and yet she spoke them with such quiet strength that no one could call her bitter. She wasn't angry, she was free. That freedom made her shine brighter than anyone else in the room. Guests began nodding, whispering their admiration for Clara. What a strong woman. She raised 3 children alone. Look at her dignity. The admiration spread, and slowly the respect in the hall shifted completely toward her. Daniel stood there, sweating, humiliated. With his lies collapsing around him, Melissa's parents were whispering furiously to each other, clearly reconsidering everything. Melissa herself looked at him as though he were a stranger she could no longer recognize. For years, Daniel had told himself that leaving Clara had been the smartest move of his life, but now, in front of everyone, the truth was exposed. The poor woman he had wanted to disgrace was far richer in strength, dignity, and love than he could ever be. And the wedding that was supposed to crown his success was turning into his greatest disgrace. The grand wedding hall that was once filled with laughter now felt like a courtroom. Every eye was on Daniel, as the music had become nothing more than a distant hum in the background, drowned out by the whispers that buzzed like bees in every corner. What was supposed to be the happiest day of his life had turned into a stage where all his lies, his pride, and his arrogance were being torn apart. Daniel stood stiff, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead. He tried to smile, but his lips trembled. His heart raced as he looked at Melissa, but her eyes were cold, full of betrayal and disgust. The children's innocent giggles, Clara's calm dignity, and the whispers of the guests pressed down on him like heavy chains. Melissa's father stepped forward, his expression dark with anger. Daniel, he said firmly, his voice carrying across the hall. You deceived us. You lied about your past, and worse, you abandoned your own children. Do you know what kind of shame this brings? To our family, you are not the man we thought you were. Daniel swallowed hard, his throat dry. He raised his hands helplessly. Please, listen to me. I didn't. No, she never told me. I had no idea. But his words fell flat. Clara's calm voice echoed louder in everyone's memory. I tried to reach you. You chose not to listen. Melissa's mother crossed her arms, her lips pressed tightly together. We trusted you with our daughter, she said coldly. And this is what you bring into her life? Lies and shame. Melissa's face was streaked with tears. She shook her head slowly, staring at Daniel as if he were a stranger. I don't even know who you are anymore, she whispered. All this time, you made fun of her. You called her nothing. And yet she was raising your children with strength and grace, while you were pretending to be a man of honor. Daniel reached out desperately. Melissa, please. But she stepped back quickly, avoiding his touch. Don't, she said, sharply. Don't touch me. The guests shifted in their seats, some whispering, some staring openly at the drama unfolding before them. Many of them had admired Daniel when the ceremony began, but now their eyes were full of judgment. Some shook their heads, some sighed, and some even looked at Clara with a kind of respect that Daniel had never earned. Clara sat silently with the triplets, her calmness making her shine brighter than all the glittering decorations. She did not smirk. She did not gloat. She only looked at her children, fixing their hair, giving them sips of juice, whispering little things that made them smile. She was not here to destroy anyone yet. She had revealed the truth so simply, so clearly, that no one could deny it. Daniel's pride collapsed with every passing second. The very moment he had dreamed of seeing Clara small and humiliated had turned against him. Instead of Clara being disgraced, it was him who stood in shame, his lies exposed, his future slipping away before his eyes. Melissa's father spoke again, his voice final. "This wedding is over." Gasps spread across the hall. Daniel's knees nearly gave way. "No, please," he begged, his voice shaking. "Don't do this. Please, give me a chance. I can explain. I can fix this." But Melissa's father shook his head with cold finality. "Oh, there's nothing to fix. A man who abandons his own children cannot be trusted to honor a wife. We will not allow our daughter to marry you." Melissa covered her face with her hands and wept. Her bridesmaids gathered around her, some glaring at Daniel, some comforting her. The wedding, which had been planned to be the grandest event of the year, was crumbled into a disaster in less than an hour. Daniel turned desperately toward Clara. His eyes were wild, pleading. "Why are you doing this to me? Why did you come?" Here, Clara finally looked at him. Her expression was calm, but her eyes carried years of pain and strength. "I didn't come here to ruin your life, Daniel. You ruined it yourself with your choices. You wanted me to feel small, but I am not small anymore. I came because you invited me. I came because my children deserve to be seen, that's all." Words struck deep. She had no bitterness in her tone, only truth, and the truth was more powerful than any anger could have been. Daniel dropped his face into his hands, trembling. He could hear the whispers, the judgment, the pity. His perfect image, the one he had carefully built for years, was shattered. The wealthy bride, the powerful in-laws, the admiration of the guests, all of it was slipping away. Clara stood slowly, her gown flowing around her like a river of light. She took the hands of her children, who looked up at her with innocent smiles, trusting her completely. She gave them a reassuring nod and began walking toward the exit. The crowd parted for her, silent, their eyes filled with admiration. Some even whispered, "What a strong woman. She's the real bride tonight. She doesn't need him." Daniel watched helplessly as Clara walked away, her head held high, her children beside her, their little feet pattering against the marble floor. He wanted to run after her, to beg her for forgiveness, but he knew it was too late. Belong to his world anymore? She had built her own, stronger and brighter. Melissa's parents walked out too, pulling their daughter with them, their faces filled with disappointment and anger. The guests began leaving slowly, some shaking their heads, some whispering about what had happened. The grand hall, once full of celebration, is now full of emptiness. Daniel stood alone on the stage, surrounded by expensive decorations, untouched food, and abandoned flowers. All the wealth, all the pride, all the plans, none of it mattered anymore. His perfect day had turned into his greatest disgrace. Outside, Clara helped her children into the limousine. They climbed in happily, giggling as they talked to each other about the big hall and the sparkling lights. Clara smiled at them softly, her heart at peace. She had faced her past. She had faced the man who abandoned her, and she had shown him and everyone else that she was not weak. She was stronger than ever. The driver closed the door gently, and the limousine pulled away. Through the window, Clara looked out one last time. She did not look back at the hall with sadness. She looked forward, toward the road ahead, toward the life she had built and the future she would continue to build with her children. Inside the hall, Daniel finally collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. He had wanted to disgrace her, but the truth was clear. He was the one disgraced. Clara had left with dignity, with love, with her children beside her. while he was left alone with nothing but shame. And that was the cruel twist of fate. The poor ex-wife he had once mocked was richer in every way that truly mattered.